Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Do I have the right group? I thought this group of business people. Let me try that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
There you go. Okay. Well, it's an honor to be here. You know, for 30 years I've lived in Grand Rapids and would fly off somewhere to speak. And I mentioned to somebody this morning, I would tell my staff, if I'm here in the office, we're not making any money, I got to be off somewhere. So now I'm spending most of my time in Sarasota, Florida, and flying back to Grand Rapids to speak. So it's, you know, it's a little ironic. Well, we are living in unprecedented times. I believe that we are the first generation of business people that have had to deal with the kinds of things that we're dealing with today. It is truly an unprecedented, historic time. And there's never been a time like this. Really, truly, we are the first generation of business people who had to deal with what we're dealing with. And why is that? I mean, you know, we all have a sense. Everybody's in here. You all have a sense of being overwhelmed, right? Why is that? You know, there was a time when we heard technology was going to make us more effective, work less, more free time, and it's just the opposite. Let me ask a question. How many people here today are working harder and longer than you were 5 years ago? Yeah, well, what's going on? Here's my perspective. As a guy, you know, I think this is part of my job description, take a look at the big picture kinds of things. Here's what I see. Number one is change. Man, you know, we're living in a world that is changing more rapidly than at any time in the history of mankind. And the reason for that is we're creating information. What's happening is as we create information, it seeps into every aspect of our business, our industries, our companies, and our lives, and it causes change. There's a direct relationship between information and the pace of change. The more information, the greater the change. There's a measurement called the total amount of information available to mankind. There's a measurement for that. Just think of this. At the beginning of the last century, in the year 1900, the total amount of information available to mankind was doubling every 500 years. All right. So what did that mean? Well, it meant that our grandparents, our great-grandparents, pretty much lived the kinds of lives that their parents did. You know, they lived in the same kind of homes, had the same kind of social structures, and things changed at a very slow rate. So at the beginning of the last century, now let's get a visual timeline. This is 500 years. So at the beginning of the last century, it took this long for information to double. Now at the end of the last century, the year 2000, it wasn't taking 500 years, it wasn't taking 400 years, it wasn't taking 300 years, or 200, or 100, or 80, or 60, or 40, or 30, or 20, or 10, or 8, or 6, or 4. It was taking 2 years. We went from this to this in the last century. Can you imagine that bell-shaped curve? Man, that thing is going almost straight up. Never been anything like that. I mean, we are truly in unprecedented times. And now, today, that was in the year 2000. This is 2019. What do you think the pace of change is today? You know, how long do you think it takes for information to double today? Last thing I read was every 30 days. Unprecedented. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to do this. You know, honestly, there's no history. We don't know how to figure this thing out. That's change. Here's another one, competition. Now, there's a couple different ways of looking at competition. One is somebody else selling the same thing you do. That's kind of the traditional way. I have a different view of competition. Competition is options for your customers. So the question I have for you is, do your customers today have more options for the things to use, to acquire, to solve their problems? They have more options for how to do that and where to buy it and so on? Does your customer have more options today than they did 5 years ago? Let me see a show of hands. How many people say, yeah, it's true? There you go. One more, and that's complexity. Every aspect of our businesses and our lives and our jobs, I believe, is more complex and sophisticated today than it was just a few years ago. You know, look at the cell phones. Gee, you know, like apps on the cell phone. You know, 5 years ago, were we even thinking of stuff like that? You know, honestly, I was in business at the time when computers were just beginning, and my idea was, I don't need to know how to use a computer. I'll just hire people who do. How silly, you know? I mean, just think of the complexity in every aspect of our lives and our business. I put these three things together and you understand we are in an unprecedented time. What do we do? How do we figure this thing out? Well, that's the challenge. I love this quote. The spontaneous tendency of our culture is to inexorably add detail to our lives. One more option, one more problem, one more commitment, one more expectation, one more purchase, one more debt, one more change, one more job, one more decision. We must now deal with more things per person than at any other time in history. Is that your world? That's my world. Yeah, that's my life. You know what's interesting about this? It's from the book Margin by Dr. Richard Swenson. Do you know when that was published? 2000, year 2000. You can multiply that, right? You multiply that. No wonder we're overwhelmed. So what do? Well, you're going to get some good ideas today. Let me just digress. I mean, you're going to get some good ideas. And at the end of the day, we're going to work with those ideas and pull them together. So I want to give you a little bit of coaching here to get the most out of this, to not only my presentation, but all the speakers. I want you to do a couple things. I want you to look for good ideas. I want you to write them down. Now, I got a definition of a good idea. A good idea is some potential future action. So you can't say a good idea is not, well, we should have done that last year. No, that doesn't count. It's got to be something in the future. So you listen to everybody today, when you get an idea that's something you can do in the future, then write it down. Number two, something you can do. In other words, you have the ability to pull it off. So, you know, it might be a good idea for the government to change its tax system, but you're not going to do that. What can you do? So number two, a good idea is something you can do. You can affect it. And number three, it's something that's verifiable. Somebody can look at it after you did it and say, yeah, you did it. So a good idea is not to think about this, because nobody can see you do that. It's got to be an action, a verifiable action. So I give you these three criteria. I want you to capture some good ideas on a notepad, and at the end of the day, we're going to work with those. So I'm just going to encourage you as you listen to everybody, as things come into your mind, write them down, and we're going to work with them towards the end of the day. Okay? I want to propose my idea, and that's this. How do we respond to a rapidly changing, overwhelming world? The only sustainable, effective response to a rapidly changing world is cultivating the ability to positively transform ourselves and our organizations. I mean, that's an ongoing thing. And specifically, what that means is something that's rarely talked about in business circles, and that is the creation of systems. And I believe that one of the highest and best works of any business executive is to create and forever refine effective systems. So we're going to get into systems. We're going to talk about systems. So here's my response. How do we respond to an overwhelming world, unprecedented world? Well, one thing to do is systemize your business. Okay, what are we talking about? That means this: gradually, one at a time, over the next 12 months, create systems for every major process in your business. What does that look like? Well, let's first talk about why is this, I think, such an effective response? You know, I'm a systems guy. The name of my business is Sales Systems. You know, I think in systems. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one is scalable. If you're able to systematize your business, it's easy to scale. That's because you see it more clearly. There is a clarity about your business and the important activities in your business that comes with systematizing the way I'm going to show you. So it allows you to increase and decrease, whichever it is, very clearly, because you understand where assets can be employed and the effective assets, and where they can be shrunk if you need to. So number one, it makes your business more scalable. Number two, you can operate effectively with less than superstar people. Now, you're going to hear a lot about people today, and you know, good for you. I'm all for that. But from a guy who has been a consultant for 30 years, I've been involved with lots of businesses, and I'll have this experience. You know, I'll be talking to a business, and somebody will say, "Dave, you have to understand the reason we're doing well is because we have really good people and we give great service." So I say, "Okay, I got that." And then sometime later, maybe I'll be talking to one of their competitors. Maybe at a conference, something like that. You know what they'll say? "Dave, we have really great people and we give good service." I say, "Hey, wait a minute. wait a minute, one of the two of you is wrong. You know, I mean, you can't everybody have the best people. I mean, that's, you know, that's an incorrect use of language. You can't both be best. And from my perspective, I'll tell you, you may have a staff of superstars. Chances are you don't. Chances are you got a staff of average people. Is there some way you can help average people perform better? That is the issue. You know, getting great people is one thing. Chances are you're not going to get a bunch of great people. They're just not out there. So you got to have a way to make average people more effective. Systems is how that works. Because if you have a system, almost anybody can come in the system and be effective. McDonald's does not hire the best people they can and say, here, you guys figure it out. They don't. They have a system. Since they have a system, almost anybody can come into that system and be effective. So there is this thing about effective systems help people become more effective. There is a truth that I learned a long time ago, again, working with primarily sales forces. Change the structure and you change the behavior of the people who operate within the structure. Change the structure. Change the structure. And you change the behavior of the people who operate within that structure. So I could go into a business and change the structure of the sales organization, you know, the way they did the sales process and so on. Never even meet the salespeople and see dramatic improvements. Never even meet them. Why is that? Because we changed the structure. We changed the behavior of the people who operate within that structure. You know, we've all heard of the analogy, you know, get the right people on the bus. Good idea. But you got to have the bus. You know, you got to have the bus, and the bus got to have the right engine. It's got to have the right transmission. Got to have tires. That's the system. And then once you get the system, you can put people in places in that system, and they'll be far more effective. I believe in this. I mean, this is a basic premise of my philosophy, my consulting philosophy. Change the structure, change the behavior of people who operate within that structure. I just want to substantiate that a little bit, help you understand why I believe that. So, you know, for years we had the Cold War, and we had these two competing entities, USA, USSR. And from a global perspective, you know, they probably had about the same population sizes, about the same distribution of skills and so on, approximately the same natural resources, and yet one far surpassed the other in terms of prosperity and production and personal freedom and so on. Why is that? The rules were different. The structure was different. People were the same, but the structure was different. And under one set of structure, people blossomed and the other didn't. I've seen this now on a micro scale. I've seen it personally. My wife and I were foster parents for a number of years, and over the years we had 19 foster children of various sexes and races and personal and physical disabilities. And I'd watch this event. The event was this: we'd bring a foster kid into our house, and my wife would impose the structure. Day one. Here's your bedroom. You will sleep in the bed. You will not sleep on the floor. You will not sleep in the closet. You will sleep on the bed. Come along. Here's the bathroom. You will wash your face. You will brush your teeth before you greet the family in the morning. You will do that. Come along. Here's the kitchen table. You will sit in a seat. You will eat with the family. You will use silverware, so on and so forth. And wham! Day one, down comes structure on these kids. And of course, they're all emotionally upset and out of control. And down comes the structure, and it was predictable. I mean, I watched this. And that is, after a few days, they would struggle against it at first. But after a few days, they would get it. They'd understand. They would see where they fit. And then they begin to grow within that. And the process of healing and growth would begin as a result of the structure. Change the structure. And you change the behavior of the people who operate within the structure. That's what we're talking about here. So, here's a quote: when placed in a system, no matter how unique and different people are, they tend to produce the same results. You want better results? Put the system in place. All right. What else? Less reliant on individuals' knowledge. This is a big deal. You probably have some people in your business who think their value is because they know it. They got knowledge, and you know, they're going to be very jealous of that knowledge because they believe that's their value. When you systematize, you take the knowledge out of individuals' heads and put it into the system. And the knowledge is an asset of the company, man. You ought to be having some way to keep that knowledge out of people's heads and into the system so it exists other than individuals' heads. What else? Evaluations are more objective because it's very clear. I mean, we're talking about clarity here. You understand with some depth and detail what everybody needs to do. Your time is more effectively used. Your time is more effectively used. You know, you can spend time doing the business or you can spend time on the business. To quote Michael Gerber, your time is more effective on the business, creating and refining systems than it is almost anything else. I remember my best manager I ever worked for, Ned Shaheen, dedicated my first book to him. He said this, my time, I do my best work, he's talking about himself, when I am not needed on a day-to-day basis. He said, when I can close the door to my office and nobody opens it because they don't need me, that's when I'm most effective. Got it? What else? Your business becomes far more measurable and manageable. Those two go hand in hand. Excellence in all you do. We want to be excellent, right? You want to be excellent in what you do? How do you know what excellence is? Well, you got a definition. You got a measurable. You can look at it in a measurable sense. So that's, you know, that's why. And finally, freedom. I want to say freedom. If you can get to the point a year from now where you have systematized your business, your time will be free. I mean, you can take a month off. You can go to Florida, you know, take that trip around the world, whatever it is, because the machine goes. Well, what's a system? Let's get into it now. What's a system? Number one, this is the dictionary definition: a complex, orderly arrangement of parts, set of principles, rules, processes, and tools. Those are my words. It's how sophisticated work gets done in every field of human endeavor. Any sophisticated work that is reproduced over and over again, eventually somebody figures out a system. There was a time in my life when I sold surgical staplers. And I would, you know, we'd actually go into surgery, caps, gowns, gloves, the whole thing, you know, sell staplers. Do you know there's a picture book for every major surgery? You know, if you want to do a gallbladder, there's a picture book, show you how to do that. You know, so and you know, a surgery is a pretty sophisticated work, and every surgery becomes systematized. You know, there becomes a process, there becomes tools, there becomes rules, and so on and so forth. And that's true for every sophisticated work. Think of any sophisticated work in this world, if it's reproduced over and over again, eventually somebody figures out how to do it as a system. It's how sophisticated work gets done. I'm going to challenge you. Take your sophisticated work, take it up a notch. So, you know, for our purposes, here's my definition for our purposes: a documented process for achieving an important result. But it's more like I think that, I'm sorry I used the word document because that limits it. It's more than a document. It's the difference between having a production plan, you know, and actually being in production. It's the difference between having a building outline, a building blueprint, and the actual building. It's more than what's on paper. But here's what it contains. Number one, flow chart of the process. Number two, set of tools. What are the tools used in this process? Number three, description of the tasks and people. Number four, a set of goals and measurements. And we can do this, apply this mindset to every important process in your business. Here's how you start. I'm going to take you through a how-to. Number one, what processes do you want to begin with? And I recommend 3 criteria to help you prioritize. What should you start with? I mean, next week you're going to systemize your business. Where do you start? Well, you look at your process and say, which of these are important? Which are the most important processes? Number two, which of these are sophisticated? For example, you might have you might be in a die stamping thing or a tool and die plant, and you got somebody pulling a lever and punching out right on a punch press. Okay, that's very important, but it's not very sophisticated. You know, it's however, moving the metal from input to output across several different procedures is sophisticated. So the question is, what's important? Number two, what's sophisticated? Number three, what's reproduced? Meaning you do it over and over again. Now you might be building a new office building. That's important. That's sophisticated, but you're probably only going to do it once. However, if you're in the business of building office buildings, then that whole thing ought to be systematized. You ought to have it down because it's something you do on a regular basis. So 3 criteria to identify, you know, what do you look for? And then here's the list. I'm not going to read through the list, but you know, typically these are the kinds of things you can systematize. Sales, people, onboarding new employees. If that's a regular thing, you're doing it all the time, you ought to have a system to do it. You ought to figure that thing out. Operations, quoting, production, you know, all these, what's important in your business, and you bring them up to the top, prioritize them, and start. So how do you start? Number one, prioritize the processes. You got a bunch of things you could systematize, but one of them is most important, and one's next, and so on. So step one, prioritize. Number two, acquire a team, pull a team together. Different teams for different processes, different teams for different systems. A couple things about this. There's a whole different set of skills to create a system than there is to run the system. I like to use this analogy. Let's say your business is like winning NASCAR races. Okay, like if you decide you want to win, you want to be an owner and win races for NASCAR, you would very clearly understand you got to have some money, you got to have a car, and you got to have people. You got to have a driver and a pit crew and so on. And you would clearly understand the car is one thing and the driver and the pit crew is something else. And if you expect the pit crew to design the car, that's probably, not a good expectation. There's a set of skills that is the people who design the car and someone else who runs it. And when you're creating systems, you got to filter through. Just because somebody works right now in the system does not mean they have the skill set to be able to define the system and create the system. So think that thing through. Another thing is, often you'll find people who really are working in that process, and they're really not interested in systematizing it because they see that as a threat, you know? And so you just want to look at the motivations of the team, make sure you got people who understand what you're trying to do and are for it and want to do it as well, as opposed to those who will sabotage it because they see it as a threat to their place in the business. And then dedicate time each week. This is so important. You know, it's the ultimate. I believe it's the ultimate solution to that overwhelming thing. You get control of it. So how much time should you spend? 4 to 8 hours a week with discipline and regularity and methodically. That's what it takes. All right, what do you do? Here's what you do. I'm going to give you an example here of a system. And I'm going to take you through the steps and show you the example. Here's what I call, because I'm a sales guy, I work a lot with salespeople, I call the big picture sales process. So I'm going to start with a process, and it happens to be a sales process. So we have over here, I have what I call the land of apathy and ignorance. Apathy and ignorance. Who lives in the land of apathy and ignorance? People you suspect might one day do business with you. They don't know you, so they're ignorant of you, and they don't care. I mean, they've gotten along this far without you, so they're apathetic towards you. They live in the land of apathy and ignorance. First job of the sales system is to identify some of them who we suspect might do business with us, and we filter them through some process, turn them into prospects, people who really could do business with us. This is the biggest part. We turn them into customers. People, when they give us money the first time, they're now a customer. But we're not done, and then we take customers and turn them into clients who buy from us over and over again, and finally we turn some of them into partners, and this is where we make our money. And so we begin to think of sales in terms of a step-by-step process. Now I'm going to use this as an example of building a system. What's the first thing we do? Well, look at that big process, and this is very typically the case. If you have a big process, it's composed of several subsets. And in this case, we have 3 subsets. Acquiring a customer is one subset. That's a process all by itself. We've got to systematize that. Turning a customer into a client, somebody who buys over and over again, that's a separate one. And then turning a client into a partner, that's 3. So we have 3 subsets within that. Very typically your case too. You know, when you say production or whatever it is, look at the subsets and let's look at each one separately and develop the system for that. So again, we go here. This is a big set. What we're going to do as an example is take the first part of this, and I call it this part here, is acquiring a customer. So that first thing we're going to do in my little example here is acquire a customer. So where do we start? First of all, we identify the process, narrow it down. Okay, this is the first one we're going to do. This is the work that you do next week, 4 to 8 hours a week. And the first thing you do is identify the inputs and outputs. What defines the process? What comes in? What goes out? Those put the borders around your process. It defines it. In this case, the inputs are suspects. See that? The outputs are customers. So we just want to take a systematic look at this and put together a system to do that. So we start with inputs and outputs. Step one, that defines this system. So when you look at your systems, what's the input? What's the output of that particular subset? Number two, what's the purpose? Why is this system important in your business? And you know, again, my little example is this: to methodically and predictably create acceptable number of new customers. I think these words, methodically and predictably, can be put on almost every system. That's the nature of systems. It's methodical, and it's predictable. And so instead of going with the winds and the ebbs and flows of things, we can begin to create a predictable outcome over and over of whatever it is, production, hiring, whatever it is. So methodically and predictably, then the next step is to flow chart the process. And we just sit down and say, step by step, how does this thing work? And my little example here, I'm going to say, here's a typical business-to-business process. This is the kind of thing you do. Do it just like this. Step one, step two, step three, step four, step five, six. So, and this is a very simple one. 8 different steps, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, yeah. We start with suspects. See that? Somebody's got to research and qualify them. Somebody's got to reach out to them, make them aware of us, remove the ignorance. Somebody's got to make a first appointment. Somebody's got to have a face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball conversation. Now, there could be several other meetings in here, but these are the main things. They got to uncover some kind of opportunity. They got to present your solution. You got to get the first order. And when you get the first order, that's the end of the process, right? Because we're going from suspects to customers. You do the same thing. You just say, what's the step-by-step? How does it look? Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So you flow chart the process. That's the next step. Identify key activities. Now we're getting into where it really begins where the rubber hits the road. Key activities, here's a definition. A step in the process is so important that if it doesn't get done, the process won't complete. So let's go back here. I say, let's look at this. You don't have to measure everything. Don't measure everything. Only measure the key things. And in this case, the 2 key things. If you don't have an eyeball-to-eyeball meeting, face-to-face meeting, you're not going to get a customer. It's essential. It's a key activity. Let's measure that. And let's say if we don't present our solution, if we don't say to the prospect, here's this, whatever this is, why don't you buy it? How are they going to buy it? So those are key essentials in this process. You do the same thing with yours. Say, what are the important things? I can't measure everything because I don't want to, encumber myself with lots of numbers. I just want to measure the important things. So you identify a couple important things. So now we've got 4 things that we're going to measure. Key activities, first meetings close to qualified prospects in this little example. And we're going to measure inputs and outputs. And that's the next step. And this is oftentimes where it gets a little challenging. Creating measurements. So you got 4 things you want to measure. Inputs, 2 key activities, and outputs. That's about right. 4 things for every sophisticated system within your business. 4 measurements. Don't measure everything. Measure the important things. So you got to create simple, fair, and objective. Simple, fair, objective. That can be a challenge. And let's just look here and say, okay, you're understanding now. How can I measure the inputs? In this case, maybe you're buying lists of suspects or something like that, and so, maybe your IT guy or your marketing person can every month say, here's how many we added this month, or here's the total that we're working with. Somebody somewhere is responsible for a number. That's the beginning. And then first appointments, first meetings, eyeball to eyeball. Well, probably the sales force probably should report on that. Maybe if you got a CRM system, you pull it off the CRM system, or ERP system, something like that, you just pull it off. no big deal. It's okay if you need to have, you know, paper, you know, every month, every sales guy's emails a number, a little form, okay. So you put in place a system to measure the key things. How about quotes? I was working with a company in Kalamazoo who had sold commercial kitchens. And they wanted to acquire new customers, and their salespeople, very typically the case, were contented calling on people that had bought in the past. And so we set up a system. Here was the deal: every customer was on a database. Non-customers were not on the database. Okay, and every quote, because a very sophisticated quote, went through a sales administrator who looked at it and, you know, deemed it to be accurate. So we said, if we wanted to do this, let's measure quotes to people not on the database. So the ultimate measurement here was the sales administrator who said X number of quotes to people not on the database, and that was every month. And you know, sometimes just measuring will improve the performance. Just that alone. Put a measurement in place. And then finally, outputs. So we want to know how many new customers did we get, and let's say, yeah, maybe the credit department could do that. Yeah, because they got to go through credit, and that first invoice, you know, got to be blessed by somebody in the process. So now, all at once, you see, instead of what is typically the case, you say, well, sales guys are doing it. We've detailed it, we've understood it, we've put in some measurements in place, and now we've got something we can work with. All right? Add goals for every measurement. Here's the 4 things we just decided we were going to measure in my example, but you can do it in yours. Suspects into the system, first meetings, quotes, customers created. Pretty reasonable. And then, now is when we begin to make real progress. We hold a monthly meeting of people concerned. We look at the measurements every month, every single month. We pull together the people who are appropriate every single month. And we compare goals to actual. And we look for 2 things. So here's my little example: goals, actual. See those numbers? So we asked 2 questions, 2 simple questions. You see, your management now, because once you get the thing in place, your management now becomes holding a monthly meeting and asking 2 questions. You can do that in a couple hours. What are the 2 questions? Is your system doing enough? Quantity. Is the quantity sufficient? Let's go back to our example here and say, well, you know, we said we wanted 100, we got 109. That's good. We said we got 10, we got 11. So quantity, you know, at least the initial beginning quantity in this process is good. Now we're dropping off here. And so that brings us to the second question. Quality. We're just asking 2 things, quantity and quality. Simple. Everybody can do this next week. You can create a system. You can get the guys together who work that system, and at the end of the month say, are we doing enough? Are we doing it well enough? Here's how we determine well enough. The ratio between 2 columns is a measurement of quality. Let me show you. Say, here we go. We're looking at just these 4 measurements. That's all we're looking at in this system. And we see we got this column in ratio to this one. See that? And here and here. Now let's just work this out. Our original goal said we were going to have a 10-to-4 relationship. That's a 40%. What happened was we had an 11-to-2 actual. That's 20%. So while we started with a sufficient quantity, this says to me our quality of this step is not very good. We're not doing it well enough. We're doing enough of them, but not well enough. Those 2 simple questions, quantity and quality, will open up all kinds of things, because it forces you, it directs your time and effort, your energies, your mental energy to where it's going to get the best results. That's why it's this is such a way to achieve excellence. In our example, we discovered the quality. Quality was not meeting our expectations, so we just dig deeper. Why is that? Why is our quality so bad? Well, do we have the right prospects? Maybe the problem is the input. Or you know, are the salespeople trained in how to do a first meeting? I mean, they're doing it very poorly. Have they ever been trained? You know, do we have the right tools? You know, do we have the literature? Do we have do we have an elevator speech? Do we have some questions we prepared? Do we have all that? Do we have all that together to make this moment, this first meeting, of higher quality? And so we, you know, it leads us. These questions lead us to an action plan. Every month, an action plan to improve this little piece, one little piece at a time. Every month, cha-chunk, 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 cha-chunk. And within a year, man, the thing is just percolating along. Can you do that? Of course you can. So you can use this. I realize, man, we're going really quick, but that's okay. Systemize every area of your business. What'll be the outcome? You'll gain control. You'll have control of your business like you have never, ever thought possible, because you see it, and you're talking about it. And it's not vague stuff. I mean, you're talking about very specific, tangible things every month. You make average people perform better. How can McDonald's? How can they operate? Man, they got systems. You know, somebody leaves, somebody else comes in. They operate the system. It's clear. Constantly working at the most important thing. This is an absolute key. You know, we're all overwhelmed with stuff. We all have too much to do, not enough time in which to do it. Sorting through and applying our resources and our assets to where it's going to get the best results is an essential discipline in our times. Man, we cannot waste time on stuff that isn't worth it. And yet, we do it all the time because we haven't consolidated and prioritized and understood. We haven't developed disciplines and methods to understand where our time is best invested. This will do it. Your time, your wisdom, your experience, your insights applied where it will get the best results. That's a huge benefit. Scale your business up and down, and eventually, here's what you'll get. Everyone will perform better. You put the right people in the right places because you got the right places. You know, you got the bus. You know where the bus is going. You know what seats there are at the bus. So it's easy to put them in there once you got the bus in place. Create effective tools. I mean, you have some tools now, and when I say tools, I mean the literature. I mean everything you use to do something. So the literature, the equipment, the cell phones, the computer, whatever. If it's something you use to do something else, eventually you will look at tools and impact your tools. You'll identify training. Just in this little example, it became clear to me we need to train the salespeople on how to do a first meeting. They probably never have ever been trained. So you see, you're able to sort through all this and apply training in a very specific, tangible place where it's going to get the best results. It's not vague and general, it's specific and tangible. Have the ability to easily scale up and down, be more in control, less stress. Approach excellence in everything you do. We all want to be excellent, but we don't know what that means. What does it mean? Well, what it means is continuous improvement on the measurables. Okay? So, I want to tell a little bit of my story. And take five minutes or so. Jeffrey, have I got it? Oh, yeah, I got a few minutes. Yeah, okay. So a little bit of my story personally. Raised in Toledo. One of 6 boys, and you're wondering which one? 3. Yeah, so my poor mother, you know, she wanted a girl the whole time. She got 6 boys. But I was a very Catholic family. I went to Catholic elementary school, Catholic high school, and so on. But I was always a bit of a free thinker. You know, so just always a little bit outside the envelope. You know, that's just who I was. And so I left. You know, I left that mindset, the whole thing, mentally as a teenager. You know, it just didn't fit. And but I think it instilled in me a hunger for things spiritual. And I was a seeker. You know, for a lot of years I really was a seeker. I looked for what was missing in my life. And you know, I got into, I did all the isms. You know, I did yoga, I did atheism, and, you know, I did Buddhism, and I was into Zen for a while and all this sort of stuff. My life was a mess, and I was a mess, you know, honestly. Mid-20s and just had no idea where I was going. I had some skills, I had some assets, but no direction. You know, it was all. And then one day, some of you might remember the book, The Late Great Planet Earth? Who remembers that? Let me see. Yeah. Couple of gray hairs. Yeah. Well, somebody gave me that book, and it scared me to death. Honestly, frightened me, man. I don't want any part of this. And so that led me out of that. I mean, it was a fear of the last days, you know. It led me to begin to study the Bible, and I did, and eventually found somebody to study with, and just taken. I mean, I'd never read the Bible. I didn't know anything about it, but I came to it with sort of an objective and kind of a skeptical mindset, because that's who I was. And it became very, very clear to me that this is what was missing in my life. And so at age 24, I said, you know, Lord, you can have me. Was baptized, became a Christian. And, you know, as I look back on it, I will say, you know, at the time, I didn't have a sense that this was life-changing. It just appeared to me to be the thing to do, you know. In retrospect, now I've looked back over decades, and what a change in my life. I cannot tell you who I would have become if it were not for that. And as I look back, I see that in my career, you know, I look back and say, wow, it's so clear to me now, looking back, so clear to me how the Lord worked with me and put me in places to give me the, you know, the temperament, to give me the knowledge, give me whatever it was, brought me slowly to where He wanted me. And for the last, you know, 30 years, I've been doing this, and speaking primarily to sales forces and conventions, things like that. I never intended that, you know, but that's where He wanted me, and I just looked back and saw that. In terms of spiritual life, I did what everybody did, and that is, you know, join the church and get involved in all that. And you know, I was a Bible school teacher, and I became an elder in the church, and we did short-term mission trips. My wife and I did, took the kids along. We did 10 self-funded month-long trips to South Africa, you know, and created relationships there and all that. And I did all that, but the Lord was working with me and drawing me closer to Him. And at some point, I decided to leave what I call the institutional church system and develop a house church, and we did. And you know, I look back at that and say that was when I began to really grow as a Christian, because I began to understand that the God, the great God, the creator of the universe, really wants to have a relationship with me. What a thing that was for me. You know, raised 6 boys, very competitive, you know, and honestly, as I look back, I think, wow, we should have had a girl in the family. It would have made a difference, you know, in all of our lives, you know, because we were raised to be very independent and task-oriented. You know, you got the idea. You know what I'm talking about. And that was me, task-oriented, independent guy. My father had a heart condition, and everybody knew he was going to die young, and he did. And my parents very intentionally instilled a high degree of independence in each of the 6 boys. And as proof of how good they did at it, every single one of us has their own business. How unusual is that? You know, clearly, that was something in the family that came out of it. And that was, so I was this highly independent guy, and it just floored me. I mean, it honestly took me years to get it. And it was, the great God of the universe wants to have a relationship with me. Oh my goodness. It took me years to get that. So you know, here I am towards the end of my life, honestly. You know, I got fewer days ahead than I had before. Still doing what I'm doing. Lord, I mean, I told somebody at the table this morning, I've been trying to retire. I can't, because I've been around so long, people still call, you know, and say, okay, so. But I will say this, and I never thought I would ever say this, that I have a relationship with God such that I never knew existed. I did not know people could have what it is that I have. And it wasn't my doing, it was His doing. What a tremendous thing. It's the biggest thing. It's the biggest thing. I'm blown away. I walk the dog every morning. I look around and say, Lord, you did this. Every morning, I can't help. Talk about systems. Look around. God creates systems. That's how he operates. That's part of the inspiration. Why should we do it? Because look around. There's systems for everything. So, thanks for letting me be a part of this. We're done. Bye-bye.
Good morning. Couple things I want to say. First is my call in life at 71 years old and still working is to help Christian leaders recognize they don't need to leave their Bible in the car. It actually is the right way to run a business. And I have such a passion for that. And it's interesting to me how the Lord leads things. I don't know if you've ever been asked to be part of 5 speakers and put a presentation together without really knowing what everybody else is going to do. That's an interesting thing to do. And then to listen to Dave talk and recognize how it flows into the way I feel what I'm going to say is amazing to me. To not recognize that the Lord is in control. He just is always, he's here to tell us something. Every one of you is going to take something with you, and it's just recognize who the real source is. So it's just fascinating to me. To me, these are the 3 best business textbooks ever written. You got to recognize that I'm from a generation older than some of you, and you may find other books interesting. But the one thing that I think is very true is there's only one source of truth, and that's the Scripture. And sometimes people figure it out. These 2 guys, Covey and Jim Collins, really got their hands around some of that truth. And to build on that, it's just, to me, it's not what I think, it's what these 3 books tell me and how I can share that with you and others. So I used to work at Mill Steel Company. I was there from 1991 to 2008. And you might want to say to yourself, well, why do I want to listen to what this guy has to say? Well, I want to tell you what happened to a company that started recognizing that they can put a structure in place, but then you got to have people that can run that. So I was hired in 1991 to put in the quality system, the ISO systems that came into the US from Europe. And we had it done in 1993. But in 1995, this was a manufacturing union shop, and in 1995 they had a strike. And there was a lot of discontent between union and the management of the company. About 1997, the owner of the company actually listened to Jim Collins on tour, talk about good to great, and we've all been working on 7 Habits from Covey, and he came and said to me, we need to think this way. We are not thinking the way we need to, because we've got this totally certified quality system in place, but we got people walking out the door who don't like us, right? So we, over time, we were able to, this is a union shop, we were able to eliminate the need for supervisors in the shop. In fact, I have learned to say that good people don't need a babysitter. If they know what they're doing, they don't need somebody looking over their door. Actually, you're spending way too much money if you're paying somebody to be a babysitter. And also then we got rid of the quality inspectors because good people know what they're doing, right? But so from 1999 to 2008, Mill Steel was voted to one of the 10 best places to work in West Michigan. Now that was just a few years after a pretty nasty strike, right? And it all had to do with recognizing people for who they are. In 2005, 6, and 8, we were actually named the #1 place to work in West Michigan. And a little side story of me, that's when I decided to retire, because when you're on the top of the mountain, I mean, seriously, where am I going to go from there, right? So I went out to the world. 2008, they also won a Sloan Award for workplace flexibility. Again, you got to realize we're working in a union-structured environment and got an award for workplace flexibility, the only manufacturing company in Michigan that did, okay? And all that being said, 2008 was the most profitable year that company had ever had up until that point. And they're just getting bigger and bigger. While I was there, we grew from $40 million to $200 million. Okay, so people matter. The systems you choose are only effective as your people. Now, I really appreciate what Dave was saying, because everybody says, I got to have the best people. Well, think about it. If 10% of the world are the best people, we can't all have them, right? It's really the system that's working with the people that you've shown how to do that. When we took union slitter operators in the steel world and taught them what quality customers needed and paid them above union wages to do their own preventative maintenance and work like that, those people really cared about what was going on. They're still just the regular union shop guys. They're not the superheroes that everybody seems think they need to find. So how do you choose the right leaders? If you think about what it says in Timothy, it's very descriptive. I've told many, many people, and in fact, the one comment in that passage that really gets to me, if you can't manage your family, how can you manage the church, or how can you manage a business? If you see that people are out of control, they're not going to be able to guide people that are with them, right? So in Jim Collins, he talks about the 5 levels of leadership. And this, a great leader builds enduring greatness through the blend of humility and professional will. The thing I like about that statement is you're talking about the CEO, the top guy in the pile, right? And we're talking about humility. It's not about us, it's about how do we show the world the biblical truth of running a business through us, right? Humility and professional will. You're just not going to stop. We're going to make this thing happen. We're going to help people find a way. And then the 7 habits, Covey's statement is seek first to understand, then to be understood. We always want to tell people, but they need to know that we hear them before we can help them find the way. And that's why I say these 3 books to me are just, if you know these books, you're going to get there. And I got to tell you right now, I feel like I'm kind of helping you drink out of a fire hose, so we're trying to do this quick. So if you had questions later, I can ask them. But so all 3 books focus on people. Employees are people. Employees are not resources. Resources are things you use up. You know, paper is a resource. Ink pen's a resource. People are not a resource. They're individuals. They have families. They have future plans. This young lady here working in your IT department has a little boy, has a husband, has a real life, right? And you got to just recognize that's true. Then the question is, you know, they have dreams. They have things they want to do with life. They want to accomplish this. They want to do that. Can we tap into that? Can we match up their dreams with our goals? You know, people need to feel, Covey wrote another book, The 8th Habit, I don't know how many people have read that, but it boils down to the fact that people need to feel valued. They need to be heard. You know, and the one thing I've learned as a manager is, yeah, I'm always busy, you're all way too busy, but when I'm talking to somebody, they have to feel like there's nobody else that matters right then. The thing that's trying to pull me away from them is not more important than they are if they have a concern. And they need to feel like they're valued. People that feel like they're valued don't wander. People want to say millennials are job hoppers. I'm going to argue that point, because millennials that feel cared about and are on a path that's going to take them where they want to go, they won't leave. I've watched that happen. So you have to know your people. And this is something, there's pictures, word pictures to me speak a lot, right? And I've discovered there's a big similarity between people and icebergs, okay? Icebergs are 90% below sea level, right? We just see the very top when we're on the water. Our people are 90% below sea level. We don't know them, we just know the thing that they do, and if they do it well or not. But we don't really know that person unless we try to get to know them. We need to get below sea level. We need to understand their strengths and their passions and how that fits with the system, right, Dave? Where we're trying to go, what we're trying to do. You know, if somebody's sideways to what you're trying to do, it's just not going to work. So do their dreams match our future needs? It's not about being a social club. We got a business trying to go somewhere. Do the people fit in there? Can we determine how to have a growth plan together, right? So are we, as the company and the person, trying to go to the same place? If that's true, those people are going to be committed. They're going to want to be there. And this is interesting truth. They talk about the round tables, and I know you'll like this, Jeffrey, because this actually happened to me just recently. Who do your employees work for? I think you would say they're on my payroll, they work for me. A few weeks ago, and I was in a round table talking about this, actually, interestingly, talking to a pastor on how to motivate volunteers, right? and he said something that just took my breath away. Employees actually work for themselves. He made the comment that millennials seem to want to work for themselves, and I thought about that, and then I stopped the meeting and I said, wait a minute. Everybody works for themselves. You may give them a salary, you may give them benefits, but they're going where they're going, right? And they actually work for themselves. They're going to help themselves get to where they want to go. Now, if we're going together, that's a good thing, right? So I just thought that was fascinating, and that's one of the huge values, kind of a side note here, huge values of these roundtables is sharing real life with people, with peers, and then coming across things that are just world-changing. That statement to me was world-changing. And there's another one here. How do we lead independent people? This is another one that came out of my interaction with the CBRT world, is you lead people from within themselves. You can't take somebody where they don't want to go, right? And if you find where they want to go and you lead them from within them and they're going where you want to go, you can't beat that. That's a dynamic that's unbeatable. So we got to get below sea level. We need to understand our people. We need to take the time. Your managers need to understand how to help people get to the level where they want to go, the things that they want to do in life. So from good to great, there's this thing called hedgehog, which is a long story and it's irrelevant really, but there are 3 points of any business. So the business should be, well, what are you passionate about? Well, you got to find people that are passionate about what you're passionate about. Think of the gospel mission. If you don't have people trying to help people get themselves up out of trouble and into the life, they're not going to get you where you want to go, right? I mean, you got to have the passion, right? So what are you passionate about in your business? And bring people in there that are passionate about the same thing. The second piece of that is, what can you be the best in the world at? What are you really good at doing? Well, you need to have the best, you need to have engaged and passionate people in those positions if you're going to accomplish this series of questions. The third question, so they need to enjoy the things. So, I mean, it really needs to be their passion. So the third question is, what drives your economic engine? So what are you passionate about? What can you be the best in the world at? What drives your economic engine? That's what Jim Collins in Good to Great says, that's where a business ought to focus, right? Well, the question is, do your employees have the skill sets to be best in class? Do you need to do more training? Do they have the passion and they want to be good at something, but they need your help to get there? I mean, but if these things line up, if you get back to Dave's conversation about systems, well, you can put the system in place, but if you didn't finish training that salesman how to finish that call, you never get that sale, right? So you have to roll these things together. So where these 3 things intersect, that's really where any business should focus, right? So back to 7 habits, there's the second habit is probably one of my favorites, because I'm for whatever reason, I am built to see about 5 years out, which is interesting when you're 71. But I can't think about right here. I'm always out there. And sometimes that's complicated to work with people that are in the day-to-day. But yeah, I get through it. Luke says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower, would you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if there's enough money to complete it? Well, of course, we think we would do that, right? Well, in our world, are you control of your focus? where are you deciding where you want to go? I remember when we went through a recession when I was at Mill Steel, and the world was slowing down, and the owner said, well, we're about 5% of the whole steel business, right? So if the world is going to slow down, I guess we're going to have to become 8% so we can have the volume the same as it is now. It's like we're not going to just slow down. We're in control of where we're going. So if we want to stay where we are, we got to eat somebody else's lunch, was his words. We got to get out there and get it done and be motivated. Don't let it happen to you. Get on top of it and do what you need to do to stay where you want to be. And so where are your customers, suppliers, and technology going? They're talking about this rapidly changing world. I mean, the technology is amazing. And the thing that, again, talking about people that are the experts, when in my time, every really good operator of any machinery had a little black book and had everything in his pocket. That was how things ran. In today's world, these people that are coming into the world today because of all the technology are basically not as much more knowledgeable, but they are more technically knowledgeable. They can run the equipment, they can do this or that, but they don't know why they're doing what they're doing. And as we roll along here, we're going to have technology help us stay out in front. And so we just need to understand where everything's going. So again, if you're looking out, where are the customers taking us? Where's the supplier base coming? Do we have enough of all that happening? Do you have the talent that you need in the future? We should be looking for, with that technology, with the customer request, what kind of talent do we need, and can we build it, or do we need to buy it? If you want to grow, set measurable targets, exactly what Dave was talking about. And so I think about, like I mentioned, I think way out. I think you need to set a stake in the ground. You need to say, okay, if we're a $10 million company now, in 7 years we're going to be 20 million. Okay, that's a number. That's beginning with the end in mind. Okay, but then you have to actually do something about it. Put first things first. Again, in Matthew, the parable of the wise and foolish builder, if you recognize that parable, the question is, are you building on solid rock or are you building on sand? What are you building your business on? You need to think like the wise builder. So for your long-term goals, I believe you need to create a roadmap. And something that you can measure. So I totally agree with what Dave was talking about. Determine your current capacity. Obviously, you can talk about machinery capacity, but I'm talking about people. Each of your groups and what's their capacity? How many customer service people does it take to answer the phone, do all their ordering? If you've got 3 now and you're going to go from 7 million to 10 million or whatever it is, how many more do you need? You need to understand that. And when would you need them? When will they hit that bottleneck? Well, maybe we're okay up till 8 million, but now, a year from now, we're going to have another person, okay? But to me, the thing that we miss all the time is we wait till we don't have enough help, and then we try to jam somebody in there that doesn't know what they're doing. And so I think you really need to think about what's the learning cycle of every job. I consult with a business that typically takes about 2 or 3 years for somebody to really be good at multiple different jobs they have. It's very industry driven. It's not something you can learn outside. And if they're predicting a 20% growth, they got to start training people 3 years before they get there, right? Because if you wait for it to get there, we're going to be in the overwhelm, right? I mean, it's just going to be chaos, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. People want to say, I don't want to spend all that money up front. Well, you're going to spend it at the backside anyway, so you might as well get yourself ready. So if you determine when each one of these numbers hits their maximum, you can prepare for it. You can build that plan. You can have the structure around it. And then create a backup so you can plan for bumps in the road. When things happen, you never know. Not all of us are going to be here in the next year. Things happen. People go away. They leave. They pass on. You don't know what's going to happen to your world. If everything is backed up and you know that there's somebody that can do everything that's out there, the Lone Ranger always scares me. As a consultant, I come into a business and there's this expert and nobody seems to know what they're doing. And right away, I'm going to say, oh, but what if they get hit by a bus? You know, what are you going to do if they're not here? And on top of that, truly thinking from a manager or owner's perspective is you feel like you got to pay them more than they're actually worth just to keep them there, right? And if you have enough of them in the business, you're going to eat yourself out. So you just have to be careful. So that's me, and here comes Mary Jane.
I'm Mary Jane Mapes. I'm from the Kalamazoo Portage area. My company is the Aligned Leader Institute. And first of all, I want you to find these because you're going to need these. There should be one of these in front of you. It says, communicate with people, not to people, engagement. So if you'd pull that out. And then there's a little card that I hope you'll take home. It's called The Art of Listening, and it's got principles and suggestions on the back. So you can put it in your car, in your billfold somewhere, but it'll be a nice reminder for you. For the most part, well, the last probably 6 years I've been doing professional speaking across the country, but I also do a lot of executive coaching, do consulting. My focus has always been people, and it's truly been the individual, because when the individuals improve, then the organization improves. My focus has been on building relationships as a communication leadership strategist, because over the last 30+ years, that's who I have been hired to work for in countries, in companies across the country. So I say I help people melt walls of isolation, help them create employee or patient, as the case may be, engagement, and as a result, increase productivity. So with that in mind, if you've got this in mind, I will get started. So here is, maybe you have heard this before, but regardless, this is a story of a guy that was driving down the LA freeway. It was about 10 o'clock at night. He hears this thub, 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 thub. So he pulls over to the side of the road, gets out of his car, comes around behind, and he sees that the air in his tire is on the way out. He's got a flat tire. So he gets into the trunk and he takes out the jack and he takes out the spare and he jacks up the car. He's taking the lug nuts off. That's what he's trying to do, but they're stuck. Now, who here has been on the LA freeway? Any of you? All right, how many lanes of traffic in one direction? 6, at least 6, maybe 8. And how much room is there on the side of the road to pull over at 10 o'clock at night? Almost nothing. So his fear is, of course, he's going to get picked off. So he goes into the front seat of the car, pulls on the headlights so the taillights pull on. And to make a long story a little shorter, it takes him about 40 minutes to get the old tire off, the new tire on, the car jacked down, everything into the trunk. He goes into the front seat of the car, puts the key in the ignition. What's the problem? Dead battery, right? So now he needs a push. So he gets out of his car and he stands there and he's waving, hoping somebody will pull up to help him. Well, somebody does. A little old lady from, oh, I know, I hope somebody would know, Pasadena, pulled up behind him. Now she's a distance, but she gets out of her car, she approaches him very tentatively and she said, excuse me, sir, but it appears as though you need some help. Is there something I can do to be of service? Well, he goes through the whole story and ends by saying, the long and short of it is, ma'am, I need a push. Well, now he has not convinced her because, see, she's had her car for 15 years. And her fear is if she pushes him, she might actually do some damage to her car. And he said, oh, no, ma'am, look. He said, you see your bumper, you see my bumper? Ma'am, these bumpers will be a perfect match. Trust me, there'll be no problem. She said, well, okay, sir. So she's convinced her. So she goes to get in her car, he gets in his car, and wait up a minute, ma'am, I forgot to tell you something. I'm going to need to be going about 25 miles an hour. That should not be a problem, sir. So she gets in her car, he gets in his car, and he waits 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, nothing. He looks out. Here she is coming at him, 25 miles an hour. Now, Would you agree that there was a little chink in the communication chain? Huh? Now, how many of you would say he was responsible for that? Raise your hand. High. How many of you would say, no, 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 she was responsible for that? All right, how many of you would say they were both responsible for that? Yeah, they're both responsible. How much responsibility do we have when we actually communicate, engage with someone else? How much? What percentage? 50%, right? How many of you have ever assumed 50%, your percent of the responsibility, whether you were sending or you were receiving, and yet there was a total miscommunication? Has that ever happened? You sent a message, you were quite clear, you knew that you spoke very clearly, the words everyone understood, but when they went away, they did not do what it was you were expecting them to do. That's happened to you, hasn't it? It's happened to all of us. And on the other hand, you've sat there, you've listened, you may have even been one of those persons that go, yep, yep, got it, And then you went away, and guess what? It wasn't exactly what they intended. So unless we assume 100% responsibility for communicating effectively so that there is no miscommunication, not only will there not be engagement, there won't be communication. And we will not be working as effectively and efficiently as we can be. Here's something I want you to do. On that little card, the little white card, I want you to jot down the name. And by the way, the focus on this is really going to be on the receiving end. Because I think if we can get the receiving end down, then the sending end and helping people understand us is going to be greater. So if you'll jot down the name of the person that you would consider to be the very best listener you know. Who's the very best listener you know? And underneath their name, I'd like you to jot down 3 words that you would use to describe how you feel when you are in their presence. I mean, some people think and think and think and they can't think of anybody, which is a sign right there. Okay, what is, you may not have 3 words down, but what are some of the words that you have written down? Anyone? Important. What's another word? Cared about. What's another one? Valued. What's another one? Understood. Another. Safe. Another. Encouraged. All right. This list could go on. So if you're feeling safe, important, valued, encouraged, whatever else you said, respected, I mean, there are any number of things that we could say. They're all very positive. Would you agree with that? When you are feeling that way, where would you say tension is? Is tension high or is tension low? Low. So when tension is low, where does trust have a tendency to be? High or low? High. So when tension is low and trust is high, would you say that you are more or less apt to be open to hearing what that person has to say? More. There is a universal truth that goes like this. Acceptance and or agreement works to open a person's mind. Non-acceptance and or disagreement works to close a person's mind. There is a great correlation between our ability to open somebody's mind and how successful we're ever going to be in communicating, motivating, and influencing other human beings. And as a room of leaders, it becomes extremely important that we have the ability to influence people in a positive way. Would you agree with that? Yeah. So then it's important that we come from a place of what? Acceptance. Acceptance. I want to share with you an experience that I actually had to demonstrate the power of acceptance. This goes back, I don't know, probably 10 years or more now. But I was working for a large medical supply company in Indiana. They would bring their salespeople in for anywhere from 10 to 14, 15 people at a time. And they'd bring them in for a solid week. They'd bring these people out of the field, and sometimes these people were working on deals that were like $750,000, $1 million deals. Whatever the group was, groups changed, they sold different types of equipment. But what I would do is every morning before I would go in, because they came in for 5 days, the first 2 days internal trainers worked with them, but day 3, 4, and 5, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that would be my opportunity to work. And I do that 4 or 5 times a year. Anyway, I would always ask the internal trainers, would you please come in and meet with me early on Wednesday morning before any of the participants get there? And so they did. And the room was set up in a U shape, perfect for training. And their name tents were already on the tables because they'd been there for 2 days. So I would go around the room and I'd say, well, what can you tell me about Bill? And they'd say, oh, Bill, big picture, bottom line, hit the high point, move on. He'll ask challenging questions, but hey, I know you can answer them, so no problem there. All right, well, what can you tell me about Kristen? Oh, well, she couldn't be any more different than Bill. I mean, she is the exact opposite. They love him, the customers love her, but they're different. She will ask questions too, but hers are for clarification, they're for support. You're going to love her. Everybody loves Kristen. In other words, I was going around the table to discover either the personality style or the behavioral style of all of the people in the group, because depending upon what the makeup of the group was, that would make somewhat of a difference in how I might actually do or say or what examples I might incorporate into that program. So we get all around the table, and in that far corner, I'm going to call the woman Arena. But there was the name tent, and I said to him, well, what can you tell me about Arena? And he said, let's see, what can I tell you about Arena? Haughty, arrogant. Nobody likes her. Trust me, Mary Jane, you're not going to like her either. Let's move on to Alex. Ooh, just like that. Now tell me, had Arena had a good first 2 days in that room? No, how do you know that? Because if there were 14 other people in the room and you, and none of those people liked you, do you think you would know it? Yes, people are reading our minds at 7,200 images a minute through nuances of body language and thought energy. We are hardwired. There's this continuous loop constantly that allows us to read all these little subconscious signs that tell us about that person. They don't have to be speaking. So when we say, well, I know what he was thinking, chances are great, oftentimes we do know what they're thinking, or we can come close. But it isn't because of what they said, it's because what they've said with their body. So she probably knew that she was not having a good time in there. Anyway, 8 o'clock, they all rolled into the room. Everybody came in from a van from the hotel. They took their seats, and then I noticed, there's one seat over there, it's empty. It was Arena's. And I thought, well, that's okay with me. I mean, I can deal with negativity if I have to, but I'm not going to invite it in. So we moved into the program. I mean, we did introductions, we did expectations. I'm ready to move full-fledged into the day when out of the corner of my eye, I see somebody standing over there in the doorway. And when I looked over, I am sure my chin must have dropped to my chest. Now, he said she was haughty and she was arrogant. But there are a couple things he didn't tell me. He didn't tell me that she was like 6'3". She had to be at least 6'3", and she was wearing heels. That was amazing to me. She was incredibly slender. Now, as somebody who has never been described as incredibly slender a day in her life, that was significant for me. But this was the most amazing thing. He did not tell me. This was like shocking. He didn't tell me that she would probably be the most stunningly beautiful woman I had ever seen in my entire life with my own 2 eyes, like drop dead gorgeous. And when I said, Arena? And this woman nodded imperiously. And then she glided into the room and she took her seat. And I'm thinking, how did she do that? So honest, God is my witness. I went home that night, I kicked off my heels, I got in front of the mirror and I said, okay, Mary Jane, glide. I cannot glide. This stubby little body does not glide. But it was amazing to me. So I walked over to her and I reached out to shake her hand, and there was that more than one moment of hesitation on her part. So I left my hand there and I said, hi, I'm Mary Jane Mapes, and eventually her hand came up to shake. And I said, we just finished introductions and expectations. Obviously, you are Arena, so I'm wondering what expectations you might have for the course and what questions you might have for me. I have no expectations for this course, none. But I do have a question for you. Who are you? We sell medical equipment. Have you ever sold medical equipment a day in your life? Our target market, physicians. Have you ever sold anything to a physician? Ever? You know, I think what I really want to know is what qualifies you to be teaching us anything? That would be my question. Well, would you say that was meant to cut me off at the knees? Yes, but I want to tell you something. One of the reasons I come in early, and I do that to this day, if I have a training session, I do that to remind myself to put on what I call my cape of acceptance. Now, when I've got my cape of acceptance on, I am so present to you. My focus is on you. So even if you were verbally attacking me, you can't touch me. It just rolls off like water on a duck's back because I'm listening to you tell me about you, even if you're speaking about me, right? So I'm listening to you tell me about me. And the beauty of you all know Harry Potter. Harry Potter has a cloak of what? Invisibility, so he can go places. Invisible, he can see things. Well, you have a cloak, or a cape rather. And by the way, I had this cape long before I ever knew of Harry Potter's cloak. But I had this cape, and it's called the cape of acceptance. So when we have it on, we're present. We're present. And when we're present, we now have access to something that I don't know that Harry Potter had access to. We have access, some people call it creativity, some people call it intuition, some people call it universal knowledge. I call it divine intervention. We have the right words at the right time with the right person at the right way. So I've got my cape on. And so when she asked the question, I had my cape on. I was present. I knew exactly how to respond. And she seemed satisfied for about 15 minutes. 15 minutes later, she came back with another zinger, meant to cut me off at the knees. This went on till 9:30. At 9:30, I thought, oh, for Pete's sakes, we're taking a break. Everybody got up and left, with one exception. There she sat over there. She had these long red raspberry nails. And I'm thinking, oh, honey, I wish you would leave. I got to think this through. Now, I think it was Dave as he was sharing his story. Some people they practice Buddhism. Some people meditate. Some people do yoga. Some people center themselves. Some people just sit in quiet, personal self-reflection, which I think is good for everybody to sit in quiet self-reflection. But for me, and that day, I was in prayer. And I was standing in the front of the room, and I think I was standing just like this. And I was saying to the Lord, to myself, God, I can deal with this woman for an hour and a half, but after 3 days, there just may be a wrinkle in my cape. How do I deal with this woman? And I no more than asked the question, how do I deal with this woman? Then bam, it's like, I almost shouted. I thought, whoa! So I walked over to her. I walked over to her. And Jeffrey, I'm kind of using you as she. And I stood in front of her. Now, she was as tall sitting as I was standing. So I waited patiently, and she lifted her eyelids. And when she lifted her eyelids to look at me, it was kind of a look of, you want something? And I said, you know, I was standing up there just a moment ago, and this question just popped into my head, and I'm curious. May I ask you kind of a personal question? Go ahead. Well, you know, it would seem to me that a woman as beautiful as you must find that you have to be gracious with other people. And I'm wondering if you've discovered that to be the case. I don't even know what you're saying. Well, you must know you're stunningly beautiful. In fact, when I saw you in the doorway this morning, all I could think of was, like, wow, Vogue model. And it would seem to me that a woman that looked like you could really intimidate men and could threaten other women. So I'm just curious if you've discovered that you have to be incredibly gracious with other people. Well, I mean, I don't know. I've never thought about that. Well, you know what? I'll bet if you think about it, I'll bet you discover that's exactly what you have to be. Anyway, I came over. I want to introduce again, just ask the question. Thank you for letting me intrude on your personal time. But I want to welcome you to the class, and I hope you have a good 3 days. Thank you. I mean, I have never before or since, and I put on my cape a lot, but I've never had that fast, that immediate a turnaround ever in my life as I did that day. On Wednesday morning, when she came into that room, you could feel, I mean, the minute when she was acknowledged, it was like you could feel the negative energy in that room. If we had voted on Friday afternoon for the woman who had captured the minds and the hearts of the people in that program, it would have been she. 3 weeks after the program, I am home. At that time, I still had my office in my home, so it might be a little more than 10 years ago now, maybe 15. Anyway, the doorbell rang. I went to the door, and there on the porch was this enormous box, and it had a Los Angeles, California mailing label on it. And I thought, I don't know anybody in Los Angeles. Who's sending me something? I dragged it in the house, slid it open, and inside there was all this food stuff from a place called Trader Joe's. Well, at that time, Trader Joe's had not made their way to Grand Rapids that I know of, or Kalamazoo, or West Michigan, or even Michigan. And there was an envelope in there, and I picked it up. There was a card inside. I pulled it out, and it read, "Some of my favorite foods from one of my favorite stores to the instructor of the most favorite course I have ever taken. Thanks for everything." And it was signed, Arena. Of course, wasn't that great? It was a good course. I think I always do good course, but it wasn't the course. It wasn't the course. What was it? What was it? It was the cape. It was the cape. When we put, see, I thought a lot about that. I thought, what happened with this woman? And one of the things that I do know, and that is when people think they're going to be punched, they all often punch first. Like, you're going to reject me? Oop, I reject you first. And when people walk into a room, they often look for their peeps. Now, who are the people that look like, who are the ones that look safe? This woman looked like no one in the room. And I'm guessing that was history for her. She looked like she came from a whole different place and space. And I suspect that people were intimidated by her. Now, that wasn't my thinking when that dropped in my head. That's what I call divine intervention. So it was as much of a woo for me as I think it must have been for her. So, acceptance. The book of Proverbs says that the deepest human craving, not want, not need, craving. Whether you're a hardened criminal, you're a newborn baby, it matters not. The deepest human craving is to be found acceptable. And when we find people acceptable, in other words, we listen. We are not walking in judgment, we are walking in acceptance. Does that mean agreement? No. I might not agree with you at all. You might not agree with me at all. But it's how we listen and demonstrate honor and respect for other people. And when we do that, they open their minds. Why? Because they're safe in our presence. That's the very first thing our reptilian or our, that brainstem, that primitive brain asks, is this person safe? And when people feel safe, they trust us. And when they trust us, they're more apt to be honest and open and vulnerable. And when we're like that with them, they're like that with us, now there's opportunity for real dialogue, real communication to take place. So today and every day, let's all of us remember to put on the cape of acceptance if we want genuine engagement. Thank you.
Good morning. How's everybody? Still hanging in there? Yeah? Doing okay? All right. I'm going to set a timer up here. not for your sake, well, not for my sake, for your sake, actually. This is a conversation that I have frequently, and it's a 4-hour workshop. So I have 20 minutes to do a 4-hour workshop. So we're going to forego standing on the tables doing trust falls and stuff like that. So, all right. So we're going to set that there. My name is John Kuning. I'm from Express Employment Professionals. We're a talent and staffing agency here in Grand Rapids. It's a franchise business, one of 800 across North America and South Africa. I work for the training division within that organization. I do manufacturing, consulting, and leadership training. And my background does not really necessarily come from textbooks or schools or anything like that. I did go to Ferris, go Dogs. Anyway. All my money has gone to the U of M over the last 6 years. Go Blue. All right. So I have a degree in mechanical engineering from Ferris, and I have my education from the School of Hard Knocks. I've worked 30 years in the world of manufacturing, making stuff for my entire career. I've made everything from office furniture to architectural millwork to 46-meter wind blades to luxury yachts for the rich folks. So I've been engaged in lots of manufacturing, and along the way I have discovered that making stuff is one thing, but taking people along the way to help make people to make stuff is a whole other thing, right? Influencing people to become leaders is really the role of leaders. The role of leader is not to create followers. The role of a leader is to create more leaders and to raise that up as you make stuff. So my background comes from making things, and my background is manufacturing. I've been doing it a very long time, which seems to be the common theme around this table full of gray-haired and lovely, not so gray-haired folks. So that's my background. So I approach all of this conversation from that place, and everything that I talk about goes through the filter of manufacturing. And it may sound a little bit different than what we've been hearing this morning, but amazingly, and I don't believe in coincidence, by the way, amazingly, the conversation is woven together in a very incredible way this morning. So we'll unpack this piece of it here just a little bit. But before we do, 4 biblically grounded ideas about work. 1, speak God in daily conversations. The Great Commission is not necessarily the Great Commission, it's the Common Commission. Speak God every day in your workplace. Strive for excellence. Do everything that you do to the honor of Him who made you, because the one who made you is the creator of the universe. So strive for excellence. There's no shame in striving for excellence in our work. We're called to do so biblically. Bless others with what we earn. To him who has been given much, much is going to be exacted. Bless others with what you earn and what you do every day. It's biblical. We can do that and do everything from a place of love. We're called to love the Lord. We're called to love our neighbors as ourselves. Show it in our workplace. So 4 biblically grounded ideas about work. Cascading goals and actions. It's an interesting concept. Introduction, I've already done that. You know who I am. Strategy and tactics. We've talked a little bit about strategy today. And it's interesting that so many people, so many companies that I work with really don't understand what they're doing when it comes to the strategic look at their company. How far out are they looking? And people will go, oh, I can't think about 5 years from now. Well, can you think about a year from now? Can you think about a month from now? Can you think about a week from now? Create your strategy. Have a strategy that brings it close to something that you can work on. And strategy is big stuff, corporate goals, company goals, where are you working? And tactics are the way that we do that. I don't know if any of you know this gentleman. This is Sun Tzu. He wrote a book. Speaking of the other books you need to read to understand business, he wrote a book in the 4th century BC about 21st century business. It was called The Art of War. All right? And if any of you would like to spend some time reading some fantastic quotes about how to do business in the 21st century, go read Sun Tzu's version of doing warfare in the 4th century BC. They are remarkably similar. Here's what he says. One of the things he says, strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Let that sink in for a minute or two. Right? Strategy without tactics. You can know where your company wants to be. You can know where you're going, but if you have no way to get there, eventually you might hit it, but it's going to take you a long, long time. If all you're doing is a bunch of tactics, stuff that you're going to do, being busy, what are you being? Busy. Are you taking yourself to the strategy, yes or no? Don't know. The busyness just becomes noise before defeat. Sun Tzu, 4th century. Hoshin planning. What is Hoshin planning? That's what I want to talk about here for just a minute this morning. Hoshin planning, the idea of cascaded goals and action items. Any of you ever heard of Hoshin planning? Anybody involved in it? Anybody deeply involved in it? No, none of us. We rarely are. Ocean planning, what is it? It's a method for ensuring that the strategic goals of a company drive progress and action within every level of that company. Okay? In other words, it looks like this. Goals and KPIs, the strategy of the company, flow downward through the company. From the corporate level downward is where the goals and KPIs and the strategy, where you're trying to take the company, come from the top and work their way through the company. The actions that support that stuff start within the floor level of the company and work their way back up through the organization. Goals work downward, actions work upward. If you can get those two things to align with each other, you start getting your entire company aligned in tactics and busyness that support the goals and strategies of your company. How many people on the shop floor understand the strategies and goals that happen in the boardroom? Exactly. Nobody, right? Let's take a look at this for a minute. Ocean planning or cascading goals aligns the organization. It provides visual tracking and encouragement. Anytime you can track something and measure it, you can manage it. It's exactly what we're talking about. And it brings a certain level of encouragement to your people. It eliminates waste caused by inconsistent direction and poor communication, because we're going to communicate as an organization and understand that every action that I do supports something that you want to have happen. Great communication. And it provides a method for employee participation. And who doesn't want that? 4 steps. Create your strategic plan. You got to know. You got to know what that looks like. You got to know what that strategy is. And this could be very simple. It could be long range. It could be lots of things. But make sure you have a strategic plan in mind and a strategic goal for your company. Develop tactics. What are you capable of doing within the organization? If you're not capable of certain tools and actions, don't try and put those things into play. I do a lot of work with lean manufacturing. I love lean manufacturing. I love the systematic approach to lean manufacturing. I love everything about it. But I tell people, if you're not making Camrys out there in your factory, let's not talk about the tactics that Toyota uses. Let's talk about the tactics that you use to get what you need to have happen. Third, take action. Please, take action. Take action. Otherwise, it's just words on paper, right? Review and adjust. PDCA, or like a PDSA, Plan, Do, Study Act. All right, let's take a look at this tool a minute. I keep saying a minute. Do I have a minute? I have 12. Takes 4 hours. Hang with me. That fire hose Tom was talking about, we're going to turn the volume up. All right, here's the tool that I use. This is simplified ocean planning. Now you can go online, and most of you will sometime today. All the millennials in the room will for sure. You'll go online and research this. You look up ocean planning, and there's all kinds of complicated ways to do it. Like there's all kinds of complicated ways to do almost everything we do in the world. Let's do something different today. Let's keep it simple. Just for the heck of it. Let's keep it simple, because it'll work if you keep it simple. This is the simple ocean planning tool that I want to introduce you today. I have hard copies of this piece of paper, by the way. If anybody wants one, see me afterwards. It's my work. Plagiarize, saves time. Just copy it and use it, please. Don't reinvent. And here's how it works. Got to kind of visualize this. Here's how it works. We're going to cascade the goals and the strategy down through the company, and we're going to cascade the actions that support those goals back up the other direction, right? So on this tool, you write the top level goals in that piece of the tool right there. Write the top level goals. There's no action items at the top level. There's no action items at the peak of the pyramid. Why? Because the only action item is I give it to you to go get it done. So my action item as CEO, chairman of the board, head honcho, chief in charge is do this. So all we have is top level goals. On the next roll down, see, I'm the top guy in the organization, and I have my goals, and you have that piece of paper and it's blank. You write my goals right there. I'm the top guy, write my goals there. Take your goals and write them right there. Write your action items right there. I'm going to show you an example of this in a minute, so unglaze for a second, I'll get there. Your action items go there. So if your action items that you're going to do support your goals, and your goals support your boss's goals, what's beginning to happen? Alignment. Next roll down. You're the shop floor manager. You hand this sheet of paper to your group leader, your frontline supervisor. They write the goals they got from the boss here. What's going to go here? Their goals. The floor level goals. What's going to happen here? floor level actions happen here. If the floor level actions support the floor level goals, and those goals support those goals support those goals, see what happens? That's the way it works. Roll the goals down, roll the actions up. Here's what it looks like. If the goals get handed down from the top, I want less than a 4.5 OIR. And I go to the guy on the shop floor, the machine operator, and say, I need less than 4.5% OIR. What do you say? And you're hired. And the very next thing he does is goes back to work because he has no flipping idea what OIR stands for. Right? But it's important to the corporation to do that. Bottom line profit of 10%, cost of goods performance less than 30, revenue of 200 million, top level goals, right? I just made all that up, doesn't matter to anything. When that happens, when it rolls done, see, less than 4.5 OIR, bottom line performance, cost of goods, revenue, it just rolled to here. The next level in the organization creates their goals. Now you know what OIR is in regards to. It's a safety measurement, OSHA incident rate. Nobody on the shop floor knows that. What they know is if they can have less than 20 recordable injuries, that goal will support that goal. So you can change the language to reflect the level of the organization you're working with to create really, really good communication from one level to the next, to the next, to the next. Action item, provide safety training. That action item supports that goal supports that goal. Are we beginning to be in alignment? Without a doubt. The next tip of this thing, those goals that were there have now rolled to here. Less than 20 recordables. Material costs less than 50%. Those goals have rolled here. The goals now at the shop floor are if I can reduce my first 8 incidents to less than 50, it'll probably support the goal of having less than 20 recordables. If I have less than 20 recordables, I'll probably have an OIR less than 4.5. You with me? Sweet! I'm not going to do this in 4 hours anymore. I'm going to do this in a half hour. So that's the way it looks. Now I have the action items happening at the shop floor level of conducting weekly safety walks. Does the CEO, the guy sitting at the peak of the pyramid, the chairman of the board, the grand poobah, does he care about that safety walk? Say that louder. Nope. What does he care about? His goals, less than 4.5 OIR. That's what he cares about. If my guys on the shop floor are doing safety walks, will it help reduce incidents? If I reduce incidents, will it reduce recordables? If I reduce recordables, will it reduce the OIR? Everyone good with that? All right. Tracking in response to that. What's our number 1 goal? Keep it simple. What's our number 2 goal? Track it. If you can't track it, you can't manage it. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So find a way to track it. Track it simply. Our favorite friend, Excel, right? Excel. Plug Excel data and then hit insert graph and let it build a graph for you. Why not? If anyone wants to know how to do that, see me afterwards and I'll give you the 30-minute tutorial about that. So find a way to track it. And in this case, I did say I came from manufacturing, right? Yeah, I'm not a really brilliant guy or anything, so I like to make things really clear, really simple. On the graphs that I put out there for the folks, I put an arrow on it that says, in order for us to be getting better, this measurement needs to be going down. And then I reiterate and say it in words. The goal is to go down to 0, and we start creating that graph for whatever it is you're measuring. And in this case, warranty items. This came from the boat building world. Goal is to trend up. See that? Very simple. Let Excel do it for you. Here's what it looks like when you get it all put together. And don't do more than 6, right? By the time you get it down, roll to the shop floor. If you're working on 6 things, you can measure 6 things. If you're working on 8 things, if you're measuring 8 things, you can work on 6. If you're measuring 12 things, you can work on 6. See where I'm going here? If you measure 20 things, you can work on 6. Exactly. So measure 6 things and work on those things and make sure they count. And in this case, I had 3 goals that in order to be improving, the goal had to be going up, and 3 of the goals had to be going down. Again, not a very clever guy. I call it the 3 up, 3 down board. Right? Now, how much alignment do you think I'm getting within the organization? Does everybody in the organization know what the 3 up, 3 down board is? Yes. When you get it rolled down to that, I can say, let's meet at the 3 up, 3 down board. Every team out there goes, Got it. I know exactly where that is. And we stand there once a week and we say, how are we doing? Are we tracking? Are we tracking? Are we tracking? Are we going the right direction? Are we going the wrong direction? Remember, every one of these is built on the goals on the Hoshin plan, which have rolled up through the entire organization. Everybody good? And then for any of them that are not going the direction you want it to go, put out there a continuous improvement sheet. What are you working on to make it turn the right direction? Action. Take action. Plan, do, check, act. More appropriately, plan, do, study, act. Understand if your plan is in place, it's working, study it and take action. That's exactly what this is for. A continuous improvement sheet that the team is using to say, I'm going to take action to correct the direction of my arrow. Everybody good? What can I answer for you? Because I have 2 minutes to kill. Yes, sir.
You may not have access to this, but have you seen anybody outside of manufacturing apply this?
Absolutely. It's a great question. Does anybody outside of manufacturing apply this? Any place you have corporate goals that have to roll down through an organization, you can do it. I actually did it with a financial planning company a couple of months ago, and it worked just fabulously well. Because you have levels of the organization who don't understand this high language. Once you roll that language down to something they understand, they can work on action items that are going the other direction. It can be warehousing, it can be sales, it can be financial planning, it can be manufacturing. Great question. Who's ever up next? You're up next.
Good morning. I'm Paul Hindelang, and I come from the Detroit, Michigan area. I was born and raised in Detroit. I am proud to be part of the senior citizen group here. And I think it a joy that we believe that we'll probably last, like George Bush suggested the other day after his first hole-in-one, at least another 20 years, so that we will be, or 30 years, so we'll be shooting our golf game and match our age at 100. I set that goal years ago with a friend of mine out in Seattle now, a business associate, that we used to ski in our 30s every weekend after work. And we committed to each other that we would ski together when we were 100. And that's the kind of thinking. So all of these ideas and these experiences that I've had and so many of the other speakers have had, we're just trying to share them of what works and what really does work are the things that we've tried ourselves, because we haven't always succeeded, but those we have succeeded we're hoping to share with you this morning. So let me start with this. My father always asked us, what were you thinking? My father always asked us, what were you thinking? See, I was raised in a family of 5 children, 3 brothers and a sister, just a regular ordinary family in the 50s, but chaos would break out in the 50s. There was mayhem at times, like you see on the TV. And when that chaos would develop, my father would either call us together as a family team at the dining room table and say, what were you thinking? Or individually, he would take us aside as a bit of wisdom that he was sharing and look at us with a strained face and, what were you thinking? And the answer was, we weren't. Mayhem breaks out, chaos breaks out, overwhelm breaks out when we're not thinking. We're just reacting. See, the problem in what, get this, I refer to in the digital transformation, you've heard everybody talk, our chaos is created because of the computer and the fact that robots are taking over. And it's the computer's fault. It reminds me of in the 50s and 60s, the devil made us do it. All right? And today the devil now is the computer. Well, certainly in my opinion, the devil has a lot to do with the chaos and mayhem that's occurring in the world. And we've talked about that a little bit, and I'll mention some other ideas. But the digital transformation didn't just start yesterday, but it is well in control. Good evidence is Amazon. You can just about buy anything you want from anywhere in the world, have it delivered today or tomorrow through Amazon or some other functioning online cell phone driven purchase request. It happens not only in personal lives but in the business lives. And unfortunately, those that aren't keeping up will not be in business. An example that I have purchased my recent leased vehicle, and I did it all electronically from my cell phone, including a photograph of my driver's license and a photograph of my insurance certificate, and they delivered the vehicle. Everything done. That will be common in the years to have. So just about anything is done in this world of speed because we're looking for immediate service. We're looking for transaction speed. And that's what's happening. If you go to a restaurant, I was talking with the restaurant owner the other day, and I said, well, people coming to your restaurant, you got a fine Italian restaurant, and enjoying the restaurant and sitting and having your food, and he says, it used to be that way, Paul. I said, well, what's happening? He says, do you have a drive-by window? He said, yeah, we have a drive-by window, and a lot of people come by the drive-by. I said, well, then how about in the evening? And he says in the evening, they want us to deliver to them. Think about that. A restaurant has gone from a place of reprieve, where you could get out of the chaos, into now the restaurant is there turning into be a chef's kitchen, where they're shipping it out because the generation today wants their food delivered for wherever they are and whatever they're doing. But that's the price of entry in the digital world. That's what's happening. It's all because of this. This is the ENIAC computer model that was actually born in 1946, and I'm not ashamed to report that was the year I was born. So that computer was born in 1946, and it was a culmination of ideas from some folks at the University of Pennsylvania. At least when they went for the patent, that's what they claimed. But the truth of the matter, it was actually started by a professor in Iowa. And he had thought of the concept and the idea of what if we reduced all transactions down to ones and zeros, yes or no. And we found ways to speed that up, because in the analog world, we used to look at an idea or a vision or have a conversation, we'd think about it, and then we would create a plan and take the appropriate action. But that wasn't fast enough. That took communication. That took dialogue and analog thinking. So they said the way to speed that up is, why don't we reduce everything and reduce it down to yes, no, yes, no. And that's the computer. That's the foundational thinking. It's reductionism at its early stage of, if we take the complex and boil it down to the digital, computer does only two things. It transacts and it stores. It transacts and it stores, and it does it faster than anybody else can possibly do. And so we can give away our responsibility in an analog environment and transfer it to a digital environment by just using a computer to say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. We don't have to do any thinking. At least that's what we've been led, unfortunately, to believe. In 1969, which was 50 years ago, I graduated from Michigan Tech. I'm an electrical engineer by undergraduate education. At that time, I took power engineering, which is all of the power plants and the sorted wirings that connect and turn on the lights. But that was the first year a course in digital electronics was offered at Michigan Tech. And I happened to take that course. I graduated 50 years ago this month. So I was taking that course 50 years ago on digital electronics, where we were trying to convert from analog thinking into ones and zeros. Prior to that time, and all during my college education, I used a slide rule. I used a pencil and paper. I used conversation. We would gather as teams of engineers and we would discuss, how do we solve these problems? We didn't have a computer to turn to as yes or no. that gave us the quick answer, which unfortunately, I think it was mentioned in one of the other speakers, a lot of our world is resorted to now. If it's not in the cell phone or if it's not available on Google, they don't believe it exists. And they run their lives on that transactional basis, using only speed and storage. But 50 years ago, Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. You probably forgot about that. Those in the room, some of us will actually remember that, probably watched it on TV at the time. And this really, my purpose is not to give you a personal history of my years, but I want to take you back a second to 1969. There was a festival in New York called Woodstock. You may have heard that. It was when Janis Joplin and other wild and crazies broke out. I was not there, but I was on the East Coast that summer. I was on a summer engineering program. And I'll never forget the chaos that was on the Jersey Shore as a result of the discussions of this and Jesus Christ Superstar, which was playing in downtown New York. And everybody was in a fever about it. That was when I first recognized overwhelm, chaos. It was started by our generation. And it's been multiplied by the power of the computer. And the computer has taken us wonderful places, but it's also taken us into chaos. It was the year of the Vietnam War, and you've probably heard stories of that, and we finally got out of that mess. It was the year the Boeing 737 was launched, the original Boeing 737. Unfortunately, we have incidences now where that same vehicle looks the same. Technologically, it's 100% different, but it now is being run by a computer primarily, and we're seeing what happens if you don't allow the power of analog thinking and the power of the human to override the computer at times. But we've sacrificed in so many ways our society to the overwhelm in the digital computer. There was no commercial air conditioning. Computers, when they were built in the early day, it would fill this whole room for the smallest of computers. Can you imagine this room with no air conditioning? When I graduated from college, many of my college friends went off to work for Trane Air Conditioning, Carrier Air Conditioning, because there was no commercial air conditioning in buildings. There were fans and other ways to stay cool. Can you imagine this building in August with no air conditioning? It was not a pretty picture. I lived in Houston, Texas at the time. That was my first job. And I wasn't selling commercial air conditioning, but everywhere you went, it was fans and ice water. And that's where the original iced tea came from. Iced tea in Atlanta, Birmingham, Alabama, Houston, Texas, New Orleans, because you had to drink iced tea to survive the summer. You talk about speed, back then in 1969, we had drugs called speed. And look where it's taken us. Unfortunately, more overwhelmed. So what's the answer? There's a fellow that ran IBM at that time. IBM, the International Business Machine, was coming out of calculators going into the first computers. There was a company called Burroughs Calculating Company over in Detroit, and they became a computer company. This is way before Hewlett-Packard, way before Dell Computer, way before any of these institutions came to pass. Certainly Microsoft, and then the Googles and the Apples and the sorts that have followed, taking advantage of this digital revolution that was taking. But Tom Watson of IBM said the problem we have is nobody's thinking. And I thought, boy, that's what my father told me. And it's still the case, and I'm out of college. And the answer is right there. The trouble with every one of us is that we don't think enough. We really don't get paid for working with our feet. We get paid for working with our heads. And that's what Tom Watson was trying to make a culture change. One of the original culture change in IBM is get out of this idea of manufacturing calculators. You're now sitting on one of the most powerful tools ever, the digital computer. And you've got to think, how is that going to be applied? Boy, a lot of wonderful people have done a lot of thinking over the last 50 years, and look what we have today. the applications with a computer. The next time I had a real impact of learning was a friend and a mentor and somebody that I worked for. I bought a franchise from Paul J. Meyer. Paul J. Meyer came from the era of Norman Vincent Peale, of Nightingale and Conant, Dale Carnegie, Earl Nightingale's programs on a 78 RPM record is how he started and migrated all the way up to now. I have his applications on an app on my cell phone. But Paul Meyer said the biggest difference between getting results and not getting results is you've got to have a plan. If you're not making the progress you desire, are capable of making, it's simply because your goals are not clearly defined. You haven't developed a plan for achieving your goals and a deadline for their achievement. So, number one, think. Number two, plan. So the real lessons of thinking and planning were already addressed earlier by 2 or 3 of the speakers, and I want to share this with you because it's hit me significantly that I did a lot of thinking and a lot of planning, and I had a lot of success in business and consulting, and I've had some failures in business and consulting. And then I introduced number 1 instead of number 2 and number 3. Instead of think and plan, pray, number 1. Then I do my thinking, and then I do my planning. And every time I pray, again, I'll call out my father. We prayed before every meal. We prayed before every event. And here it was, some 50 years later, I missed that little element. No wonder things worked so well. He took time to first stop and pray, then think, and then plan. So I share with you today that because what we really have to do is eliminate about 80% of the things we're doing in our lives. They're just not worth it. And then of the 20%, delegate as many of them as possible. Do the ones that you really love to do. Don't do the ones that you don't love unless you absolutely have to. And most importantly, determine what's imperative. Every day I look at all the things that I want to do, and I love doing things. I have as many projects as anybody I know, but I have to do something today. And that thing I do today is the imperative. So by 6 a.m. every morning, I've looked at everything I'm doing, and I pull out that one imperative. And I commit to doing that. If and when I get that done, then I'll move to the importance or many of the other projects or things I'd like to do. The problem is we're constantly distracted. We get distracted. If you ever go on your computer, it's just a world of distraction. If you're not on your computer and you're trying to read a book, then you have a child or a spouse or a phone call or something else taking you off your imperative. So the biggest way to overcome overwhelm is, number 1, understand what is imperative, and number 2, fight the day through avoiding distractions. Let's take a look at some of the digital tools, because I don't want you to conceive or think that I walk away from the digital world. I've been part of the digital world. I have attempted to adopt every single part, because I, like somebody already mentioned, figured out some years ago, if I didn't stay current in technology, I would be obsolete. I would not only be obsolete in the business world, but more importantly, I wouldn't be able to talk to children. I wouldn't be able to talk to young people. I wouldn't be able to minister to anybody, because they would look at me and say, he's just a geezer. And that may be true, but I'm relevant because of the power of digital technology. Here's some of my favorite applications. I talk to people all the time that are in financial disarray, and when I ask their business, what are you doing? Show them, they're doing things on a spreadsheet. It's incomprehensible not to have a completely excellent financial management system that you could do from your cell phone. In my business, and I realize it's a small consulting business, I can do every transaction I need right from my cell phone. But I do it from the computer. But number 1, personal life and business life, you have totally automated with the electronic tools available. Pipedrive or Trello. Pipedrive is really a sales management, opportunities management piece of software. Very easy to use, but I have 30 or 40 projects spread over about 15 or 20 different entities over various timelines, and I need to get a grasp of those. I need to hit a button and get a whole list of them so I can think about them, not work on them. Use Pipedrive to do it. Project management is the same thing with Trello. Otter is a wonderful free tool you could download. I'm always in meetings and people are saying, well, I wish I'd have written that down. And I said, well, don't worry about it. I turned on my Otter. Well, what do you mean? I hit the button and everything's been already recorded and transcribed, and I send them an email with a transcription of that meeting, with everything that was said in the meeting, for free. OTTER. Get trained. We talk about capabilities in the digital world. It's shocking to me how few people, or sadly, how many people, do not know how to use personal mail, Outlook, do not know how to use Google Docs, are not proficient in using a WordPerfect, was the old day, the Word programs, or another one of my favorites, Grammarly. If you do any amount of writing at all, Grammarly, another free service that you just hook on. Every time I write a memo, every time I type an email, every time, Grammar is watching over my shoulder and correcting my punctuation and telling me exactly what words to put in or giving me substitute words. Grammarly is my paid, stored English teacher. We've earned this. It's for free. It's available. Take advantage of it. And finally, things like Excel and so many other electronic programs. So we have the power. Are we using it? So my question then is, do you really, when you walk out of here today, really want to overcome overwhelm? Our culture pushes us. You'll go out of here and you're going to face a group of people in the world that aren't talking like this at all. They're telling you you can get whatever you want, whenever you want it, as fast as you want it, and it's really easy to get, and you ought to get it. And you ought to get it right now, and you ought to go in debt for it. And that's really what's important to you. But let me tell you, more transactions, doing them faster will not bring you happiness. And I think anybody, as you age, you begin to see it much clearer than you ever saw it. In the early days, you're seeking. You get to a certain point that you've achieved or then failed and then achieved again or whatever, and then you start understanding you're really seeking something that cannot be found. Your work, your workout, your money, your fun, all your studies, your family, they're not nearly as important as what you think up here. What you do by yourself, sitting at your desk, first thing in the morning, because as a man thinketh, so he become. You will become that day exactly what you're thinking about. If all you're thinking about is overwhelm and chaos, that's what you'll become. If you're thinking about worry, indecision, doubt, financial insecurity, whatever you're thinking about that day, you will produce it that day. So I'm suggesting, as Tom Watson said, and as my father told me, what are you thinking? Stop it. Start thinking of the right things that you want to have happen, that you want to bring into your life. There was a book written by Richard Bode, and it was about a young boy that wanted to become a great sea captain. And he talked to his neighbor, and his neighbor said, young man, let me tell you, first you have to buy a little boat. And he coached him and showed him how to sail a little boat out in the bay. And he put him through all the lessons of success and failure, when you have to judge the wind, when you have to judge the sails, when you have failed to put your anchor in at the right place, all the little seafaring stories. Because until he learned to sail his own little boat and came to that realization, he certainly wasn't going to be a ship captain. I was Googling, and I came across something just stunned me, so I had to bring it as an extra comment. 7 Dimensions of Wellness from Grand Rapids Community College. I said, how so apropos. Now, we've all heard these. You need physical dimensions, emotional, intellectual, social, spiritual. Your environment and your occupational dimensions all affect your wellness. Well, there was another story that I'd heard, and it's about the bow and arrow. So let me suggest that visualization. The bow and arrow, Cupid's bow and arrow, is all about love. And you pull that back, that bow, and the bow bends. And you let it go, and the tension gives up. So we all have to do a little better job at pulling and bending. You need to pull a little less and bend a little more. Let's stop trying to do so many things and start doing a few things, the imperative things, well. When we do that, we'll really be concentrating on what matters most. Focus on the imperative. I found this funny clip from John Lennon. Those of you obviously know of the Beatles. My wife actually saw the Beatles in Detroit. That's how many years ago. They haven't been on stage in 50 years. But John Lennon had this nice quote. I hope you can read it. I'll read it to you. When I was 5 years old, my mother always told me that happiness was the key to life. When I went to school, they asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I wrote down happy. They told me that I didn't understand the assignment, and I told them they didn't understand life. What your mother tells you and what your father told you probably has a lot more merit. You might want to revisit some of those thoughts. So what do you really want? To be healthy, wealthy, and wise as most, or just be happy? Well, the good news for you is happiness is a spiritual problem. It's not a material problem. You will not find happiness of any kind in fast transactions, more money, more toys, more anything, because you have to seek it somewhere else. You have to seek a truth that comes from in, and a truth that comes from your reflection. In order to think deeply, you really need to detach yourself. And my favorite thing to do when I feel overwhelmed is I get out a clean sheet of paper from my printer, white paper, both sides, nothing on it. I go to another room or sit at another table, and I start over again. I reset. I first pray, then I think with a clean sheet of paper, and then I create a plan. Only then do I go into action. And when I go into action, I know I'm working on an imperative thing. If I could do anything I want, I'll put it down on that paper. I'm restarting. I'm getting to start over again. As a tribute to CBRT and people like the CBRT organization, which many of you I'm sure are affiliated with, the most imperative relationships that you will enjoy in your business career will come as a result of finding people of faith to make your journey with. Those people of faith will challenge you on your journey and will reinforce you on your journey. And they will lead you places that you never otherwise get to go. So may God bless all of you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this presentation. Perhaps you've never made a Christian commitment. We want to give you that opportunity today. Just a few easy steps. First of all, recognize your need. The Bible tells us that in Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All of us are sinners and must recognize our need for a Savior. By confessing our sins and turning from them, we will find forgiveness. The Bible promises in 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and righteous to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Believe in Jesus. God wrought a miracle when he sent his only Son to die that we might have life. Put your faith in him and believe in his power to save you. The Bible says in John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." God has given us a great gift in his Son, but we must receive this gift. Thank him for loving and forgiving you, and ask him to live in your heart. His promise to us is clear. In John 1:12, the Bible says, "But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God." So Jesus is the atonement, the sacrificial lamb, the remission of sins, just as if we'd never sinned, and the forgiveness. Through Jesus, we have daily forgiveness. And having received his salvation, confess your faith. The Bible assures us in Romans 10:9, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. You know, we're all going to die and spend eternity somewhere, either in heaven or in hell. We want to give you the opportunity to pray with us today. Let's bow our head. Lord, I recognize my need for you as my Savior. I confess my sins to you now, and I turn from them, and I ask for your forgiveness, Lord. I believe in you, Lord Jesus, that you died for me, that I might have eternal life with you in heaven. Lord Jesus, I receive you now in my heart, and I thank you for forgiving me. I thank you that you love me. I thank you that you receive me into your kingdom. I believe in my heart that you are my Lord and that God raised you from the dead, that I might be saved and spend eternity with you. I thank you, Lord, that I am now part of God's family, and I commit my life to you from this day forward. Amen. And if you've prayed that prayer with us, we encourage you to share that with someone today. Thank you.